Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the Managing Director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, or maybe not the title so much, but the thumbnail suggests, we're talking about, lockdown yet again. And I came across a passage in a book that made me think about, oddly enough, sort of the dichotomy at play right now, I think, in sort of the public sphere with respect to thoughts on the lockdown. And the book is called War in the Far East, Storm Clouds Over the Pacific, 1931 to 1941. And to be clear, there isn't any unspoken message. I've just been reading this book. It's a rather interesting book. It's by a person named Peter Harmson. And I really like history, so I was just reading this book. And a passage came to me that they're talking about sort of the lead up to the war in the Pacific, but a passage I saw really, it just made me think of circumstances that, and in a much totally different context, completely different context, situation we're in with respect to lockdown here in Thailand. Quoting directly from this book, this is from the chapter Countdown, page 153. Again, the book is titled War in the Far East, Storm Clouds Over the Pacific, 1931 to 1941, by Peter Harmson. Quoting directly, in the words of a prominent historian of the origins of the war in Asia, quote, one did not mind its passing while the other was crazed by the tick of the clock. And I went ahead into the notes because that was a quote, and that's from Final Confrontation, page 161, 162. The reason I brought this up is, again, just to read that quote again, one did not mind its passing while the other was crazed by the tick of the clock. And what they were talking about, to put a little context on that, was in the lead up to the war, Japan sort of knew at the time that it was sort of at its zenith and could not really improve very much in the sense of materiel and in the sense of their preparation. They couldn't really do much more than they had done. Meanwhile, the United States was sort of slowly, and the rest of the West and other powers in the region, including in Northern Asia, were sort of starting to kind of come into their own, if you will, with respect to making preparations militarily. And so in sort of the lead up to the war, it was sort of a sad state of affairs insofar as hindsight, because the United States was kind of dragging its feet sort of in any kind of peace negotiations, because they knew that they had time, if you will, to improve, while the Japanese sort of felt crazed by the tick of the clock. Now, that's the context for that quote. With respect to what's going on right now, I thought it was interesting just that, one did not mind its passing, and that's time, while the other was crazed by the tick of the clock. I could not think of a better way to describe the dichotomy between certain segments of society here in Thailand regarding lockdowns and like the SME sector, for example, that has been the direct subject of lockdown, for lack of a better term. And I think this is especially keen in the small retail sector of the economy, as well as, especially food and beverage, the restaurant, food service industry. I think, to say crazed by the tick of the clock, as each day goes by, the situation, frankly, gets more dire for these folks. And just yesterday, I was talking to a client that's in the distribution end of the food service industry, and it's a real problem, and really as the days go on, you can almost see them, I can see some of these people become weathered almost by the day from the implications that this ongoing inability to just simply conduct their business is having, both from a financial standpoint as well as an emotional standpoint, and a social standpoint, social perspective. Folks are really having a hard time with this. Again, this is not here to lay blame. It's simply an observation that different segments, different people are affected by events in different ways. And folks that are directly in the SME, especially the SME economy, but the greater economy as a whole, folks that the business sector is most detrimentally affected by lockdown. Unfortunately, and again, this is not laying blame. It just is what it is. This is the same as it was in the United States or in any of the Western countries, you could level the same observation here in Thailand. Folks in the government, largely their position, at least financially, oftentimes is not really that affected by this, because they continue to either go to work or continue to conduct their work and be paid. Whereas folks that can't open their business, it's just not the case. They're crazed by the ticking of the clock. As each moment goes by that they can't do business, that's another moment that's detrimentally affecting them, basically. So again, not to lay blame, we saw this in the United States. I keep track of a lot of U.S. news, especially in the disconnect between quote-unquote essential and non-essential workers. You saw this a lot where folks that were deemed essential, they and especially those that were deemed essential that could, work from home and things, they had a very different experience with lockdown compared to those who were either deemed essential and in many cases were almost completely overworked, or were deemed non-essential and couldn't work from home. And those people had a really tough time of it. So again, I just thought I'd bring this book up. I thought it was kind of an interesting sort of thing to point out. When I was reading that, I just immediately thought, yeah, it's a weird dichotomy to be in, where the passage of time is fundamentally impacting or just not impacting at all one subset of folks, while the passage of time is absolutely maddening for another set of folks.